the enduring substance of things, the regular order of their fate, the steadfast character of men and the norms of morality, the demands of the law and the religious meaning of the whole universe. All this has, as it were, an ideal existence and validity which can only be expressed in terms of the independence of the individual facts in which that substance and lawfulness presents itself or in which those demands and norms are or are not satisfied. Just as we distinguish the permanent character of a person from the individual acts by which he expresses himself or which may even contradict him, so the moral imperative exists in unbroken dignity regardless of whether or not it is obeyed in practice. Just as a geometrical proposition is valid independently of the individual figures that represent it more or less exactly, so the substance and powers of the world as a whole exist regardless of which parts of it are alternately conceived by human perception. Of course, epistemology must distinguish the eternal law of nature from the temporal sum of its realizations. But I do not see what it is supposed to achieve within the activity of cognition except the determination of every single possible realization. The objective entity certainly has to be distinguished from the subjective perceptions in which it is reflected. Yet its importance lies only in the fact that it unambiguously determines every possible perception of the object. It is true that the ethical norm lies beyond those individual actions to which it may be positively or negatively applied, but its sole meaning is to determine the value of any such action, and if there were to exist or could exist no individual actions at all to which it referred, then its actual significance would be zero. Briefly, the category of these substances and values is generally different from each individual case, and from the relative sum of these cases, no matter how large it may be. Its absolute sum total, however, is its exact equivalent. Apart from their metaphysical meaning, they are nothing but the abbreviated expression for the totality of individual events, perceptions and actions. One should not be misled by the fact that certainly no empirical series of particulars, which is always incomplete and relative, covers or exhausts the contents of these categories. This is the form in which the concept of property is employed. Both conceptually and legally, property must clearly be distinguished from individual rights and from the enjoyment of the object's benefits. What anybody will do with their property can never be so determined beforehand that one could say that this sum of actions and enjoyments coincides with his property rights. But the totality of possible and actual uses is nevertheless equal to it. No matter how much the jura in re aliena may differ from property rights, there is only a difference of degree between them in terms of their content. Property is nothing but a sum total of rights over the object. Even such an apparently unified and circumscribed possession as the Roman Principate consisted, in terms of the history of law, of access to a series of offices acquired in different ways, just as the lord of the manor owned the serf as property only in the sense that the lord exerted a sum total of individual, slowly expanding rights over him. Yet property expresses and guarantees not a relative sum but, in principle, the absolute sum total of rights over an object. It is precisely for this reason that property as a reality, even though not as a conceptual abstraction, presupposes, as a necessary corollary, action on the part of the proprietor. Static possession exists only in the imaginary aftermath of the processes that precede it, and in the imaginary anticipation of future enjoyment or use. If one disregards these processes which one falsely considers to be only secondary, then nothing remains of the concept of property, the mutual dependence of having and being. The various kinds of the subjective movement that is termed ownership are, to some degree, dependent upon the quality of the object concerned. Money, however, is the object of possession that suffers least from this dependency. Acquisition and use of objects other than money depends upon particular forces, specific qualities and endeavors. It follows directly from this that the specific possession, in turn, exercises an influence upon the quality and activity of the owner. Whoever owns an estate or a factory, in so far as he leaves the management to somebody else and becomes a rentier and invests his money in a picture gallery or training stables, no longer has a completely free existence. This means not only that his time is governed in a particular way and form, above all it means that a specific capacity is presupposed as well. Specific material possession entails, at the same time, a retrospective predestination. The possession of different objects is a different type of ownership as soon. It is a question of more than the juridical meaning of property. The ownership of a distinctive object which seeks to be more than the abstract concept of property is nothing that cannot be immediately attached, as if from outside, to every personality. Rather, it exists through an interaction between the forces or qualities of the subject and those of the object, and this interaction can only emerge out of a certain relationship of both, that is out of a definite capacity of the subject as well. This is only the reverse of the notion that the owner is determined by the effect of the possession upon him. Just as the possession of specific objects is all the more genuine and active the better and more certainly the human subject is suited for it, so the reverse is just as true. The more fundamentally and intensively the possession is really owned, that is made useful and enjoyed, then the more distinct and determining will be the effects upon the internal and external nature of the subjects. Thus there is a chain from being to having and from having back to being. Marx's question of whether the consciousness of men determines their being or their being determines their consciousness is here answered in one sphere of existence, since men's being in Marx's sense includes having. This peculiar connection, by means of which a person, through a specific investment, is directed towards a particular possession which, on the other hand, determines his being, is tighter or looser depending upon the object that forms its pivot. In the case of objects of a purely aesthetic importance, economic values that are determined by an advanced division of labor and objects that are hard to acquire and utilize, the connection will be very strict, and it will be more and more relaxed along the scales of increasingly indeterminate objects, until it finally seems to disintegrate altogether in relation to money. The dissolving of this dependency by the possession of money, the independence of being from possessing and of possessing from being that is accomplished by money, is first illustrated in its acquisition. Because of the abstract nature of money, it is the end of all possible investments and activities. Just as all roads lead to Rome, Rome being conceived as lying beyond every local interest and as standing in the background of every individual action, so all economic roads lead to money. Just as Irenaeus called Rome the compendium of the world, Spinoza called money the omnium rerum compendium. It is at least the constant byproduct of all different kinds of production. The peculiarity of money lies in its being acquired by dealing successfully with other objects. The able farmer will produce many fruits of the earth, the diligent shoemaker lots of shoes, but lots of money is gained by efficiency in any specific trade. To earn money, therefore, does not require those specific qualities by which the acquisition of other objects is tied to the subject's being. There are, it is true, personalities that exhibit a specific ability for dealing with the money side of all transactions. However, since economic transactions are generally expressed in money, the persistent general commercial ability presents itself as a talent for making money. On the other hand, our interpretation is strengthened precisely by the fact that some people are conspicuous for their lack of understanding of all money matters. That such persons are so much in evidence more than those who, for example, have no talent for agriculture or for literary or technical tasks itself illustrates that making money refers to a wider circle of qualities than the production of any other value. The fact that money completely divests itself of its origins, that is, the specific activity by which it is deserved, both in the economic as well as the moral sense of deserve, explains why the enjoyment of a well-deserved fortune easily appears to be snobbish and produces a feeling of hatred in the proletarian that does not arise out of other prerogatives, such as birth, office, superiority, unless more embittering and aggravating factors are added to them. On the other hand, an analogous exception may be observed at the very peak of the money economy. The expert may perhaps recognize the hand of a certain personality at work in the transactions of the great financier or speculator, a specific style and rhythm that characteristically distinguishes the actions of the one from those of another. However, we must first of all take into account what has yet to be demonstrated in the case of other phenomena, namely that in the case of extraordinarily large sums of money the purely quantitative character of money actually provides a place for a nuance of qualitative distinctiveness. The indifference, the refinement and banality that are peculiar to money that is constantly circulating do not affect, to the same extent, these rare and spectacular concentrations of immense fortunes in